I'm Andrea, a passionate DEI advocate and consultant on a mission. Join me in each episode as we celebrate diversity, ignite conversations, and craft workplaces and educational institutions where everyone thrives. This podcast is my commitment to making a meaningful impact on the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are you ready? Let's get diversifused. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Get Diversifused podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Horton-Mericli, founder of Diversifuse Consulting and a passionate DEI advocate and ally. In today's episode, we will discuss cultivating inclusive communities for diverse learners within organizations with our guest speaker, Dr. Kristy Taylor. Dr. Taylor, also known as the Social Impact Career Coach, has assisted hundreds of clients in achieving their career goals. She is a military veteran. Thank you for your service, and a certified professional career and executive coach with expertise in REBT mindset, life, and emotional intelligence coaching. Dr. Taylor is the founder of WorkSolutions, LLC, where she specializes in providing career and organizational development, as well as resiliency coaching and workshop facilitation for mission-driven individuals and organizations, utilizing her signature REBT DEIA framework as a change management model. She champions WorkSolutions LLC as the prescription for a mission-driven workforce. Dr. Taylor empowers individuals to reach their highest potential by providing supportive, accountable coaching and career development services. So welcome, Dr. Taylor, or Kristi, to the Get Diversifused podcast. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Andrea, thank you so much for having me. I know this is going to be a great episode just based on our conversations before we even started the podcast. So I'm really excited to be here today and join you for such a great discussion for something that we're both passionate about.
As I said, I'm excited to have you, and I echo exactly what you said. I'm from our previous discussion before the podcast. I just got more excited. I was like, oh my gosh. This is great. It's going to be great. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your story and how you became the founder of WorkSolutions LLC, why you decided to found it, and some of the other DEIA initiatives that you have that you're currently doing.
Okay, so thank you so much. I would like to say, I feel like I was telling somebody this, I was like, I sort of just fell into it, right? Because for years I taught and developed courses around cultural competency, DEIA, and I was, for me, I'm not going to get myself directly involved in these conversations, but I will teach these courses and be involved in community engagement in the background. So I'll just say a little bit about my experiences and what kind of has led up to this. So WorkSolutions is actually a relaunch of a business that I started back in 2016 called Healthcare Consulting. And back then I was really focused on just being a career coach for healthcare providers. And I would infuse a little bit into our conversations and when coaching clients, the importance of being culturally competent, diversity, really understanding patient populations, because those would be some of the questions that you, of course, if you work in healthcare, that you're going to be asked, right? And as also as advocates and leaders involved in community and health advocacy, those are just the tenets that you need to be familiar with. Fast forward, I took a hiatus from the healthcare consulting, and then in 2022, I decided to relaunch. And I started kind of under the same premise that I'm going to be a career coach that's really focused on the healthcare industry. But then when I look back over the span of my career working in higher education, the how I used to make sure that my students were also engaged in the community and the work, I was like, there's so much more that I can do. And given my background and experience, I really need to focus on being more of a voice, right? Instead of just, like I said, just being in the background. So we have done a lot of work, but I will say that much of the work that we have done with WorkSolutions, we say that we are the prescription. So if you see my name, WORxK, that is pronounced work. The RX means that we are the prescription for resilient workforce, work environments, resilient careers. We focus on supporting mission-driven organizations. And that typically means, and I say the term social impact, but everybody's like, Dr. Taylor, what is that? So if you're not familiar with the term social impact, in layman's terms, I like to say that we help the people who help the people. Nonprofits, education, healthcare. If you're committed to making a difference in your community, in the lives of other people, then WorkSolutions is here to help you, whether it's career or, again, workplace resiliency. Now, part of that transition to me opening and relaunching WorkSolutions was actually dealing with my own career challenges. Because in 2020, I made the decision to not only to I was still running my business as healthcare consulting, but I made the decision to transition out of higher education because I was really having a difficult time with my work environment. Part of what we really focus on here is when we talk about championing diversity, equity, inclusion, we also focus on resilient, healthy, safe work environments, right? That's all a part of these discussions on inclusion. So last year, I was on a deployment with the military. I was on a deployment. I got to the end of that deployment, and I said, I'm ready to take WorkSolutions to the next level. Within the past year, these are all the things that we have done to really begin to expand outside of our comfort zone to focus on DEI. One, I created, did some research, created the REBT DEI framework, which we'll talk a little bit about. Most people, it's very triggering when you say the word DEIA, right? But it also opens up the door for a conversation. Because for years I've been teaching these courses and developing these workshops around these topics, but it's really time now to really demonstrate to leaders how embracing these tenets of DEIA can really help to shift the narrative within organizations as a change management model. The other thing that we have done within WorkSolutions is we've launched our Diversity Works Roundtable series, and we are hosting conversations around various topics related to DEIA. And we are also hosting initiatives, like I did a mental health conference in May, mental health summit. I also did a health summit this year. During Women's History Month, I hosted a podcast blitz where I had women from all backgrounds coming on the show. So we have really been committed to, within the context of DEIA and career resiliency, fostering conversations across the board on how to really build resilient workplaces and helping people who are, again, committed to being mission driven build resilient careers. Because you know just as well as I know, Andrea, that when you do this type of work, we get what is called burnout. It's really the term is passion fatigue for those of us who are committed to making a difference, because we're so committed to what we're doing that our burnout is on a different level, because it's really tied, it's really heart-centered burnout, right? So I'm going to stop right there because I think that really kind of sums up the work that we do. We combine this work, and this is how we are focused on making an impact. You know, we want people to be resilient, you know.
That's awesome. That's a great story. And again, thank you for your service. I cannot believe that you're doing this, balancing this with your military service. So that's, which can, you can be on call any minute, anytime now. So it's, it takes a lot of resiliency and forethought and a lot of planning, and, with scenarios that could happen, like a lot of backup plans.
Yeah.
So kudos to you. I mean, and thank you for doing this work also, because and helping nonprofits who, as you know, with their initiatives, because as you know, nonprofits don't have a lot of the funds. They have to, go for grants, and just because they apply doesn't mean they're going to get it. And so it's really good that your company does that, because there's a lot of nonprofits that, even though there's a lot of passion in their employees for whatever mission their nonprofit does, people are people, and DEIA in organizations is needed in every organization, regardless of how good their mission is and stuff. So thank you. So can you explain a little bit more, because you had mentioned your REBT DEI framework. Can you explain what it stands for our listeners, and also how it addresses the unique needs of diverse learners and professionals?
So I'm really going to talk about this in a context, right? Because one, let me start by breaking this down to discuss we all know what DEIA is. And notice that I don't just say DEI, I say DEIA. I include that accessibility is because most of the time when we're talking about DEI, people forget, we get so caught up in the construct of race that people forget that it's inclusive of women, individuals with disabilities, So I try to use that all-inclusive phrase, right? Also, so REBT It's rational emotive behavioral therapy. I say techniques because I am not a therapist. Coaching is therapeutic, but I use rational emotive behavioral therapy techniques. So let me give you just a short on what REBT is. Basically, rational emotive behavior therapy is when if you're working with a client and that client has self-limiting beliefs, you immediately identify the self-limiting belief or the roadblock. And then you help them to identify what are the factors that are contributing to that self-limiting belief. Now, if you are familiar with DEIA and the constructs of and the principles of unconscious bias, if you are familiar with all of the terms that we use in DEIA, like cultural competency. So as I'm talking, it begins to unravel to you or be revealed to you that when we apply rational emotive behavioral therapy techniques to DEIA, you can kind of see how people might be experiencing unconscious bias that makes you have assumptions about other groups, right? And so I kind of saw that link and I'm like, this really can be used and combined with DEIA principles, because when we talk about creating and drivers for DEIA programs, but not only that, also fostering change and building resilient organizations, which is what I really try to really focus on. When you combine those two, you can really build effective programming. And so I'm just going to explain just a little bit more about rational emotive behavior therapy. So again, we figure out what the irrational belief is, those roadblocks or things which we would call in DI unconscious bias that may impede a belief, right? Then you confront that belief, right, with the reality, and then you begin to replace what we call irrational beliefs with rational thoughts and beliefs. So if you use cognitive methods, we would be the ABCDE model, where you're replacing that and challenging that belief. And because once you challenge it and replace it, you acknowledge, challenge it, and replace it, right? That's going to allow you to move forward. So if you take those same principles that are in REBT and you look at change. So I published a book, Introduction to REBT, the REBT DEI framework, where I did this research. And it talks about, it's a simple book because it's not a hard principle to understand. Like, you have some basic understanding of DEI. When people see this book, they think it's about the context of race. There's literally nothing about race in the book. The framework is a organizational change and learning design framework, which is, you know what I mean? So, but if you look at this from a leadership standpoint, Andrea, as soon as you say, you say the word, you say DEIA, is very triggering to people. What is the difference between that when leaders say, I'm going to initiate change, whether it has anything to do with DEIA or not? Usually when you say, if you think about Kotter's 8-step model, which if you've taken a class, like a management class, you're familiar with that. Usually when we try to implement change within the organizations as leaders, we're going to get some resistance and pushback, right? It can be very triggering. So what I've done here is I've taken a framework I've designed a framework that is really flexible. It can be used for coaching. It can be used to lead organizational change, because within the context of that, you're going to be coaching and really champion, because it helps leaders to really to understand. As a coach, it's going to help me to understand what are the irrational beliefs that are impeding my client from progressing to reach their career goals or whatever goals that they want to set, right? As an organization, this framework is really helping me as a leader to understand, believe it or not, what are the irrational beliefs within my organizational culture? Okay, what is keeping me from moving this organizational culture forward? And it helps me to address challenges. There are 6 steps to the framework, because again, even if you're designing a DEIA program or initiative, the framework can serve as the basis of that. Because whatever the issue is going to require you as a leader to do some reflective work. It's going to also require individuals to be strategic about who you're choosing to champion that change within your organization. And when you're designing the programmatic, whether it's going to be some type of training intervention or you're seeking to scale something, you're going to have to be strategic in how you address that. And all of that I address in the book. So it's 6 steps involved, and I'm just going to go over those quickly.
Okay.
And so the 6 steps of that framework, if you go to WorkSolutions.com/framework, is outlined very simplified. is one, to really just seek a rational understanding to what's going on. This is where we are focusing on, identifying the root cause of what the issue is, or what is impeding progress. What are the irrational beliefs? Then we focus on, we have an element of this where in the next step, we focus on building emotional resilience or organizational resilience. We equip individuals with the skills needed to navigate the challenging conversations. And so when we talk about from a learning and development perspective, think about this early on. As leaders, when we're designing inclusive leadership programs, we have to be equipping leaders to have those tough conversations, not just about the DEI piece, but all DEIA piece, but also about anything that you're going to be taking responsibility for and leading. Then there is the behavioral accountability piece, which is step 3 in the model, which is really focused on cultivating a culture of behavioral accountability that encourages individuals to take responsibilities for their actions. If I am coaching a client, there's that behavioral accountability piece. If I'm building a DEIA program where we have to have real conversations, even the people who are engaged in building those programs need to have real reflective conversations with themselves and as a community, right? As a community of practice before you even seek to launch an initiative. Because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. You don't even realize you might have a certain level of bias. Nobody's just an all clear. We say that we're inclusive and we're just all know. Even I was confronted with that recently. Well, I had to really do some self-reflection when I say I am this inclusive person and I engage, right? But we all have some level of unconscious bias. That is not racism. That is not sexism. It's just
being human.
It's just you're human. So once we have established, for wherever we're using this framework for, again, the more in-depth discussion is in the book, when we're seeking the rational understanding, focusing on that resiliency and behavioral accountability piece, about the middle of the road there, this is where we're going to focus on the thought transformation or organizational transformation piece. We're going to facilitate the transformation, leveraging those principles that I discussed for REBT. And this could be through strategic programmatic design. But if you think about transforming organizations or change, this is the step where we have established the parameters for what accountability looks like. We know what the needs are. Now we're going to have to put the steps in place to really focus on transforming the organization. Now, part of what Cotter talks about is once you are able to develop and implement change, and you solidify that change, right? You have to put steps in place to make sure that change is sustainable. So the last 2 steps or parts of this model really focus on inclusive leadership development. That's actually a part of the framework. So, we're going through the process of designing this change and implementing this change, but how do you make sure that you solidify this change as part of the organizational culture? Okay. And that means that we're being intentional about our, again, programmatic design, and we're looking at all facets of it. This is not just a learning model. I'm just using it in that context because of what we're discussing, right? And then the final piece of it is continuous learning, unlearning, and evaluation. That's the whole sentence there, because the continuous learning, unlearning, and evaluation is the final piece, but it's actually, and I talk about that in the book, you're actually not waiting to the end to do this. You're actually doing it throughout the process, because this whole process is going to be iterative. We try things as we initiate change, you see what's not working, then you change. Right? So it's continuous learning and evaluation throughout the process of trying to implement that change. With clients, you might be coaching the client, and I give a client a technique to say, hey, I recommend maybe you try this technique. The client tries that technique, and maybe that technique does not work for them. Right? And so that's the process where we're looking at what's going to really work for that client. The same thing within the organizations, right? But hopefully, as we've gone through and we've looked at each element of this framework, and we understand that continuous learning, unlearning, and evaluation is a part of that discussion throughout the process, that's going to help to mitigate some of the need to having to stop and start over again, right? But just being open to the continuous learning, unlearning, and just fostering a culture of continuous evaluation. And that is not only of the organizational culture, but also leaders and us as employees, leaders that within that framework, or you're seeking to change organizational culture, change behavior, drive change, to address the bottlenecks within and build a more resilient organization, that we really also continue to encourage people to reflect, right? And be self-accountable, because recognizing their individual contribution to the organizational culture is what makes up the ocean. Their drop is part of a larger ocean. So that is a way of me just kind of breaking that down in terms of how I look and the research that I put behind this framework.
Awesome. Thank you for breaking it down and explaining it so thoroughly. And many of my guests talk about the importance of self-reflection, and as do I, because we cannot even expect to make any kind of change or impact if we don't start with ourselves first. We have to look within and be honest, really self-assess and reflect on our implicit biases. And as you said, we all have them. We're all human. No one's clear of, bias free. We all have those thoughts, and that we don't, some of us act on, and most of us hopefully don't act on. And it's basically stopping thinking before you speak and act, and responding appropriately to the situation. And I do have a question.
If you're in a situation where you may not have responded appropriately because maybe you just didn't know, then just be accountable for that. Like, we're not going to know everything. Like, I don't know everything that might offend somebody, right? I don't know every new thing that comes out. So just be aware of that you're human. So good point, Andrea.
Yeah, and like that, right back at you. Like, don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something, or if you made a mistake, whether it hurt somebody unintentionally or not. Hopefully it didn't, but it's like sometimes we do stuff that does hurt somebody emotionally, or has a larger negative impact than we may think. And when we find out, we gotta own up to our own flaws and our own errors, and because that's how self-progression is done. Just like if you think of, I'm going to do it. I love analogies, by the way. Just like if you think of someone who's an addict, the only way they're going to start that sobriety is to admit to self-reflect and admit that they have a problem, and start working from there. And it's a daily thing. So it's not the best analogy, but it's the only analogy I can think of.
The best analogy. It's been some years since I taught health education. I do remember, like, I've done some research on the health belief model. I think it's called the trans-theoretical theory of change, where it is literally where, I have to look it up if I said that wrong in this podcast area, but it was literally one of the first theories that I would teach my students, right? And that's basically exactly what you're saying, that even if a person is a drug addict, you as the advocate, you can offer to help 1,000 times, but the reason why people keep relapsing is because of the fact that they're not ready for change. That's really important, because when we have those discussions about change within organizations, or even self-reflection, that is actually applicable, because what a lot of times, and this is why used to be, I still remember, it's actually called the trans-theoretical model of change. When we talk about like AA programs, or all of those types of programs based on relapse, those programs are based on that model, right? But people are not going to be ready to change until they're ready. And I think that sometimes we get so gung-ho and passionate about the work that we do, that we have to also be willing to accept the fact that people are flawed. There's there is a word that it was such a big word that I have to go look it up in the book. But we talk about how, in organizations, in that research, it almost sounds like I made the word up. I have to literally go look it up. But it was such a
it's a 20-syllabic word. 20-syllable word.
Look, I'm gonna try to say it because it's called decatastrophization, right? Decatastrophization is where we do all of this stuff we're trying to champion change and
Mm-hmm.
we want to promote it and we're passionate and committed, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
guess what? And I think I mentioned this in the book. Organizations is that we're not therapists. A
Mm-hmm.
organization, a workplace is not like, it's great to believe that as a DEI advocate that we're going to be able to implement change, but we can introduce these concepts to people. They have to be willing to embrace
Yeah.
them though.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it's really important for organizations that have taken on the commitment to being supporting DEIA, for them to go through that process of decatastrophization. That I said it right that time, where they actually are putting parameters and structures in place. Like, and decatastrophization is really just you taking a look within your organization. And it's actually a part of REBT, because when
Mm-hmm.
clients are doing that self-reflection and figuring
Yeah.
out what the hurdles are, that is actually decatastrophization. Organizations do that when they're figuring out what are the bottlenecks, and leaders do that. What are the bottlenecks that are hindering change? And then if you've made a commitment to being a DEIA, inclusive organization,
Yeah.
you put structure in place and
Mm-hmm.
policies in place to support that. That's what the decatastrophization process looks like. It's a fancy word for just self-reflecting, putting policies and structures in place. Because if you're going to be committed to doing this work to foster a resilient and inclusive work environment, you got to understand that not everybody's going to be on board with it, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
you're going to have to change the organizational culture, and that includes decatastrophization, putting the structure and policies in place to say, hey, as an individual, you have a right to be who you are, but here's what we stand for
Mm-hmm.
as a company. Here's what we stand
Yes.
for as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then that person has to decide if they're going to if they fit.
Yeah.
You got to be very careful with that, because you can't just fire somebody because they don't agree with you. But
Mm-hmm.
that person has to decide if they're a fit for that organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from an HR standpoint, you'll start looking at it performance wise, because if the person's doing their job, then they're doing their job. They might not
Yeah.
just want to be a part of that.
And if
So,
they're not,
but organizations have to
making
be
any
very
issues in
clear.
the company.
Yeah. They have to be very clear on what they stand for and not
Mm-hmm.
teeter-totter about it. Here's our
Mm-hmm.
DEIA policy. Here's what the expectations are in terms of how we should be treating each other professionally. And here's how we foster inclusive environments and supportive environments. Be very clear on that, so that because when you're going to have some resistance. It's just a part of life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh
But
yeah.
so,
People are people. People
yeah,
have their opinions,
and that's why
their
it's so important
experiences.
to really be clear on what you stand for as an organization, and how you, not only what you stand for,
Mm-hmm.
not just saying words to placate, right, but actually
Mm-hmm.
putting policies and processes in place through decatastrophization. Now that we know these fancy words.
I'm gonna have to get the spelling of that word from
Yeah,
you,
I
because I
saw
keep
it in some
thinking
research and I
caption
was
wise.
like,
I'm like, I can just see all the misspellings.
yeah, when I was putting together when I was putting together the book and I was going through the research, I was like, this is so spot on, because it's an aspect of rational emotive behavior therapy, but it's just a process where the client would just go through the process of recognizing those irrational beliefs, and then putting steps in place to challenge them and transition and make the change. That's all it is.
Awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, and I keep thinking, as I said, I keep thinking captions, but it's like, but
It's
I want to
capitalization with the DE in front of it.
go. Oh, capitalization.
No, Catherine, look, you can hear my southern twang coming out.
Catherine, like Catherine.
Catastrophization, because I like the word, so it's catastrophization. So say it like that, and then put a D in front of it. I had to spell it out for you when we get done for this, because it got me tongue tied. But I love the word so much, I named a chapter out of it.
I love it. I love it. I want to go back to backtrack a little bit to your REBT DEIA framework. So you mentioned the rational understanding and like beliefs. Is that of the individual themselves, or that they have of themselves, or is it that they feel others have of them, or both?
No, it's of themselves, right? So
Okay.
so we're looking at it, because remember, we can apply this across different things. So if
Mm-hmm.
I'm coaching and I have a client, I'm going to use this from a career standpoint because that's what most of my clients come to me for. If they, they're saying, I feel like I'm not going to be able to get to the next level in my career. I'm having this trouble, like, all the standard, you're a career coach too, so So
Imposter
you're
syndrome.
asking them those questions that's going to allow them to self-explore. So it's really addressing, when we talk about irrational beliefs, it's the irrational beliefs that you have within you. And as a leader, though, there's an extra added responsibility when you're talking about organizations, because leaders don't realize how they impact and shape culture.
Yeah.
So you're not only going to be using this to say, if I'm examining my organizational culture, what are the irrational beliefs in my organizational culture? And sometimes you have to get that through like surveys. You get that, you have different feedback mechanisms about the irrational beliefs, work groups, but you also got to be reflective on your own self, right? Because as a leader, because as a leadership team, how are you influencing your organizational culture? And what is it about? Is there anything within you, right, that is kind of influencing, even if silently, having an impact on your organizational culture? Like, you might be championing one thing and saying, I really believe that we should be this, right? But do you genuinely believe that? You know what I mean? Because that's going to see the genuineness and the inability to connect. So leaders have a twofold responsibility there, because our rational emotive behavior theory is not about you projecting and blaming. It's not about the external locus. It's about the internal locus of control, meaning how are you seeing things? And you taking responsibility for that and moving it forward. But when you're applying it to organizations, you do have to look at the larger context of what is the collective the collective view within your organization that's impeding culture. A lot of times, sometimes the people are so resistant to change because they are content. They don't want to move. They're comfortable. You know what I mean? And they can contribute. You know. So
why change it? I already know how to do it this way.
It's like, right. It was already working fine. Why we got to change? We've been racist for years. Why do we have to change? I'm pretty comfortable. You know what I mean? So it's like, or so when I say that work is not therapy too, it's like it's always going to be like a thin line competition, because we're not going to be in the business of getting in too deep on why someone believes what they believe, but we do have. But we do have to address the fact that, and that's why I say decategorization is so important, because organizations need to be very clear on what their policies are. If you're saying we're fostering an inclusive work environment, then what is that going to look like? Be very clear on that, so that you can also have some checklist expectations for how it's going to go. Because sometimes, though, in those work groups, you do get into these deep conversations, and then honestly, you end up connecting with people, finding out that they are having some challenges, and then you might connect them with an EAP program. Like it becomes deep rooted work, right? But
the EAP program's part of DEIA. It's and there's actually, I'm actually surprised how many organizations do not have one that are on the larger scale, like smaller nonprofits and things like that usually don't have one, but larger organizations, I'm surprised how many do not have one. And it's, as you said, if none of those internal surveys are ever done, or assessments, you don't know what you don't know. And life is good, because you're in your own little bubble.
I talk about doing this process of applying REBT that you might, you're doing cognitive restructuring, but I do recognize, and I even have a definition of this fancy word, decategorization. It is a cognitive restructuring approach, right? And when I talk about even cognitive restructuring, role playing, we did an exercise that I definitely plan to use, where they gave us some scenarios. It was like, okay, you are a 20-year-old man, a bisexual male from some country that may not be accepted, but they gave us like these scenarios when I first started my current job, and in each scenario, it's like, okay, I'm me, but I'm this person, right? And I'm like, it really made you think, like, that person, what their experiences might be, because we never look at, we always say, okay, we're advocates, and we make these general comments, but being put in a situation or scenario, um, it really makes you think. When I was a teacher, we did a thing with Palm Beach County. I had them come out and they did a thing. It was called the cost of poverty experience, where the students had to go through a simulation of what it was like. We had tables set up in the room. They had to go apply for food stamps job. Like they were given a scenario, and then they had to go and apply for all this. And a lot of my students who had came in making assumptions about groups of people or individuals, like once they went through that scenario, it was very eye-opening. And I kind of experienced that same thing in that scenario, where they gave each one of us like a person who may be experiencing this, because then you realize that even how we do DEIA is a very first world perspective.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I've done a lot of work with immigrants and refugees and lived overseas, and it's just living overseas is very eye-opening, and humbling, but also there you can see the positive, I mean the good things in other countries, and the things that are lacking in the United States, and the good things in the United States, and the things that are lacking in other countries. So it's it's very eye-opening, and just experiencing other cultures that may, as you had said, depending on what country or culture that individual may be from, that's marginalized in some way or another. How are they experiencing that? Can they even, if it's an LGBTQ plus male, um, are they living a masked life because of fear of being killed by their family, even, or disowned? I mean, all these different things that we as Americans in Western society don't think about, and don't realize that there are so many, and that was just one identity. So it's like so many different struggles and challenges and barriers that prevent many from being their true selves, and out of fear. So
Yeah, and when we talk about from a strategic learning design standpoint, because I know we've talked about so much when we're designing learning programs, I was just thinking, when I mentioned cognitive restructuring, we are really, that is part of the process of intentional training and learning design, right? When we're looking at scenarios, role play, all those things that it's not going to just be, if you are delivering a DEIA program, let's say you're delivering training on cultural competency and it's just a PowerPoint with a few definitions, that's not going to be impactful, right? Because people do that stuff just to check it off the list to say. And I was meant to say in the beginning, that's where some of my hesitancy in the beginning of being involved in the getting involved up front, because for years I've always been the person behind the scenes designing classes. And in fact, when I took my certification, I was like, this literally looks like classes I've designed previously, focused on this stuff. But I want to say, it's just the training, the way that we should be an organization, so it should be constantly learning. But when you're doing intentional design for programs, and you're trying to make sure they're inclusive, like those scenarios, role playing, those things, because training itself is really causing that cognitive restructuring. It's getting people to think differently and have an open mind. And a lot of times we approach stuff from our first world experience, and we don't consider there are many layers to it. I wanted to that was a touch on the training piece, but again, I lay out a whole process for designing.
awesome.
I mentioned it here, from the needs assessment to training intervention design, the importance of taking into consideration training versus facilitation strategies for DEI-centric programming, because you need to have flexibility in how they are delivered. And even from the evaluation process, right? We're looking at impact evaluation. All of that is not just, so if you say I'm going to do a DEI training and you are not taking into context like all of the many layers of DEI, and just like you said, like EAP programs, that's a part of DEI because it fosters, again, health, inclusivity, access to care, right? All of those
People
programs
be successful.
Yeah. And so we need to have holistic conversations instead of just focusing on one avenue, which is, the race game, the discussion on race, or even gender. It is so much more than that.
Ooh, yeah.
And people don't always realize the implication. We were talking a little bit earlier, and I'll briefly mention it about when we talk about women. I'm hosting
Mhm.
this will have already aired by the
Yeah.
time I host my DEI panel for women tomorrow, right? I intentionally, when I do these DEIA, these diversity work panels, I intentionally try to the best of my extent to make sure that we have diverse groups of people on these panels, right? I'm not looking to necessarily have an argument per se. So, I do, because everybody gets that same speech because we all got jobs, we don't want to, but what I am trying to do is make sure there's diverse representation, women in it. So even tomorrow I have if somebody goes back and listen, I have a retired military lieutenant colonel who used to mentor women. He wrote a book on leadership. He's on this panel, and the panel is for women. But I'm just saying that I just try to bring some perspective on it. That's just so it's not just going to be one side, so we can consider other things. But I think we had a brief discussion before coming on, and we were talking about like the challenge with even the rollback of affirmative action. Like people don't realize the implications of that. This is coming from someone who a few years ago would be like, "Hey, I'm just putting it on the table. Like, hey, I'm behind the scenes. I'm not going to be front or facing on these programs, but as I've done the work within the past couple of years of becoming more front or facing with the EIA, I literally just told somebody, and I was like, this is something I'm becoming more and more passionate about because I see the trickle down effect. So rollback affirmative action, which really the rollback of it was to impact one area, which was education, but the trickle down effect of that. And the person who I will give him the day of saying his name really is behind a lot of this stuff. He's focused on the race-based aspect of it, but the trickle down effect. My point is, if it wouldn't be there if it wasn't ever needed. I was reading somewhere last night, women got the right to vote 1920, black women didn't get the right to vote to what Civil Rights Act, it's 1965. So, so it's like a lot of this stuff. My mama was born in I'm not gonna tell her age because she's only 25. But I'm just saying it's not as people like, oh, that was in the past. It's not as in the past as you think, right? We're talking one generation ago. I'm in my 40s. I was still taking the bus. I graduated in 2001. I was still taking the bus from an area in my neighborhood that was bused because of segregation. So when school integration started, they had a quota that they need to meet. So they would come to this one neighborhood and pick up kids and take them to one school district so that there would be enough black kids. I could literally take the bus from my neighborhood that I lived in and then take the bus in another city from my grandmother's neighborhood, which was a totally different school district. But because of the integration, they were still doing that. This was in 2000, 2001. They ended it in 2001 when I graduated. So think about it. It's not that long. So my point is there's a trickle down effect. So we have the Fearless Fund, which, that was being challenged. And that was being challenged because this is a fund who funds Black women in business. They have a specific focus, right? But then as a result of the rollback of that, now we have another group who says, okay, I think the Fearless Fund is more well known. So I'll just briefly say another group, and people can look it up, who has had to change their name. Their CEO announced, okay, this group is actually for all women. Their CEO a few days ago had to come out and announce, like, hey, I got to take the word women out of my name because we are no longer getting the grant funding. Because even though we serve all women, like this has been a trickle down effect. So, again, people think that when we talk about this stuff that is only pertaining to race or one aspect of it, but that's why I'm very intentional. I am going to, for as long as I can, stick with the name DEIA because folks are changing it up. Why? It wouldn't be here in the context that it is if it wasn't needed and necessary, right? And so to have to change the name when I'm doing the same work, to me, a name does matter. You might not like my name, Andrea, but I'm not going to change it and tell you, well, it don't matter what you
Well,
call me.
I was thinking.
You know what I mean? It's just like, no, it does matter because you don't get to change it because it makes you uncomfortable. That's really how I feel about that, right? We wouldn't be here. Well, it doesn't matter. We can just call it workplace organizational culture. It's not the same.
No, because there was already like workplace culture, which is part of DEI. So it's like DEIA, and and employee engagement and all that. All these are components and that help everyone. Because I was actually having a conversation with one of my colleague who's on a board that I for a career counselors association, and we were talking about diversity, and she was like, diversity doesn't, she didn't say that it doesn't mean anything, but everybody's diverse. A white cisgender male is diverse just from his experiences. A Latinx woman who is from Mexico is diverse because of all her experiences and identities. An indigenous native of Canada is diverse because of that, their experience. I mean, it's the coming together of all these individuals from all over the place that is the foundation of DEIA. And I was like, I thought that was a very interesting.
I agree, and then I also know within the context of that is, we still it wasn't started. Exactly. It was started because of historically underserved.
Yes, marginalized
we need
population.
To make sure that the focus is on. Yes. So when I address DIA, like I used to go, we have to look at it in the context of thought processes as well, and that's my generic "we are the world" answer, right? Because there is diversity in thought and experiences, but we also need to continue to make sure that we acknowledge what was the purpose behind DIA. I can go deep with it because I remember.
I hear you.
I can hear you. I say, okay, it's under a different name. I think back, as a history teacher, which most people don't even know that I am still teaching, but history professor to this day. I think, what if we called slavery a workforce development, a global workforce development initiative? You know what I mean?
Yeah, who was the politician that mentioned something like that? It was beneficial, or anything.
Yeah. That was in Florida, and that's where I got there.
I thought it was Florida.
Where I'm like, what if we call slavery a global international collaborative global workforce, multi-generational workforce initiative, where most families, we can't just. Listen, I think there's a difference between acknowledging history and if stuff happened than to sit here and play the blame game. That's a totally different. I don't believe in that, right? But I do think that it's important to acknowledge history. What I don't like is, and I'll be straightforward with that, it's like, I'm not going to look at somebody who's my colleague today and be like, I hate you because of your skin tone, because of something that happened 400 or 500 years, 200 or 300 years ago, right? That's an irrational belief. That's irrational. But it's still important to just acknowledge history, and that, yes, systematically and historically, these groups have been underrepresented. That was the purpose of us having and starting these DEIA programs, right? To address. We don't want equality, we want equity, because equality and equity are not the same thing.
No.
You know what I mean? We want to be equal, but the equal starts with equitability. We want equity. And because of the systemic issues, a lot of times, like if we want women in leadership, whether black, white, yellow, purple, right? So we're going to just take it from a generic standpoint of women. Then if companies are going to make that commitment, then it really does start with intentional training, identifying your pipelines, your recruitment. If you're going to take somebody and you want them to move into the echelons of leadership, then you got to kind of start at the beginning, especially if they're going to be in your organization, right? They're growing within your organization. You got to be intentional about that when they get there, and have that inclusive leadership development model that's going to actually grow their career in the company, right? So that's what it looks like. Is being strategic, companies being strategic about that process from a workforce development standpoint, so that they can have inclusive environment, because that's the only way that the gap is going to close. Even in education, I mean, if you, I don't know your background, if you taught before.
I was a teacher, yes.
So
in low income neighborhoods,
in Florida, where I used to live. But I also taught it, but that typically, like I don't know if you've heard that prison to I think it's the prison pipeline, because it's like the third grade reading scores are a predictor of the prison pipeline, and like that is research based. They can look at third grade test scores and estimate the number of beds that they'll need in the future for a prison because of the reading scores.
Are they looking at special education class? Were special education classes?
The regular classes. I mean, I didn't take a deep dive because when I heard that, I was like, is that true? And I had to go, that was years ago. I went and pulled that research. I have to email you, but it's literally that prison to pipeline where you're able to kind of look at the scores and you can kind of tell, right? So in a classroom, equitability would just be like me giving all the children books. Everybody has a book. We're all equal. We can read. Everybody can. I mean, everybody has access to the books. But the problem is, have we addressed the social determinants, the systematic issues like those kids, the equitability, the equality versus equitability piece is really putting in programs to support those children who were having trouble reading, right? Who were having, who need the extra support, because me giving everybody a book doesn't solve the problem.
Who need to be tested.
They need to be tested.
In the educational system, it is like pulling teeth, trying to chisel against the brick down a brick wall for parents to get their child tested for certain learning disabilities. And
sometimes it's just the parents might the child may not even have a learning disability, just the parent doesn't have the resources. When I taught fourth grade, I did this in Texas. That was a migrant.
Me too. I
taught in Bracketville. You ever heard of Bracketville?
No, I taught in Austin and Pflugerville and Manor.
It's right outside of Uvalde. They had a school shooting in Uvalde. Almost 15 years ago. Wow. But it was a migrant community. And the kid, the kids' parents would move with the crops. So, sometimes we wouldn't even get kids. They would be in school, but the parents would move. No, they wouldn't even start class in Word at that particular elementary school until November, which means they done already moved from one place. The school year started in August, and they moved from one place to another.
Yep.
I would have kids reading they fourth grade reading on the first and second grade level.
I believe it.
But I can't just give them all a book, right? And go, well, I've solved the problem. Everybody's equal. Everybody got a book.
And then if you add the ESL, if there is an ESL need onto that, it just it makes it a little bit more complicated.
Right. So we have to address the equity piece is trying to get these kids up to a level where they would be able to read, right? And as a teacher, we can't always control the outside factors because their parents, especially the parents ESL, they're working. They don't always have the time or the education themselves to be able to do some stuff like that.
And there's some cultures that think, the professionals know best. Who am I to ask?
Yeah.
And question. But then you also have like the rezoning of districts and so if individuals who live in a trailer park who can walk to a school have to be bused, because it was rezoned to another school. It's
well, I can tell you in my little country town, we definitely didn't have rezoning. We barely had enough people for the school. But I get it. You know what I mean? It's so different dynamics in each thing. And when I actually moved back into higher education, I moved to I was teaching in Belle Glade, Florida, which is another migrant community. And so in that community, again, folks would come and travel in. And so again, I remember when I was really getting my students involved in community engagement, I did not believe it. Some of the projects that they brought in, the kids was like, okay, the teachers would try to make, I had one project I never forget because the teachers, the young man talked about how the teachers would try to make home visits, but the literally these migrant community apartments would just have one bathroom on the floor, right? And so the way that the apartments were structured, it was not even, you really wouldn't even be able to find the student because of the way that it was structured. The apartment buildings were structured, so you couldn't even really do a home visit, and that was a really caring community. But it's like, I was just shocked that this is the way that people were living in one of the richest counties, because that was Palm Beach County in the United States. That it was literally like one of those things at that point in time where you across the track. It was, so, again, sometimes we do this work and we have a very first world perspective, but it's like people like you who've done a lot of work, with migrant community, then it broadens your perspective, right? Because you really see, like, even when people come here, some of what they're experiencing and the challenges.
Oh, I agree. So you already touched a little bit on unconscious bias, but can you expand a little bit on it about how it might play in hindering inclusivity and how organizations can work to mitigate its impact or beyond self-assessment once they do self-assess?
Look, it really comes down to, if I heard you right, we're talking about
Unconscious bias.
unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So I will say this: you're not going to be able to move anything until you identify the unconscious bias. Because what's the point? This is one of the reasons why I didn't get involved in these discussions up front, because I kind of felt like if you pay attention to the political atmosphere, right? Companies would come forward and then they would just say, when stuff was happening politically or whatever's in the news we have going on, oh, we're going to appoint a DEIA director or whatever, because then they're just being responsive to whatever's playing out, And a lot of times those positions would get cut, or they would end up doing stuff like Title IX, like things that's like HR stuff, right? Instead of actually being a person. So that, to your point on that question, it's like, if you don't address the unconscious bias or acknowledge it, you're not gonna be able to move beyond a program that's only just a band-aid. Whatever you create within the organization is not going to be sustainable. It's going to be just one of those programs that's just a band-aid. Oh, we're going to hire a director of DEIA. When people are doing stuff like that, but they're not actually addressing the root cause and doing the self-reflective piece, you might move a program forward on the surface, but it's not going to actually be impactful. It's not going to make a difference. So when I talk about working to mitigate the impact, I'm resolute that we have to work through the difficult conversation of unconscious bias and acknowledging it. But again, acknowledging in a real way to understand it. Just because I acknowledge it, that doesn't mean I'm going to change a person, because we're not in the business of you're not going to be able to systemically change somebody who is personality, right? But if you are doing this in uncovering the unconscious bias within your organizational culture, meaning what is happening, the things that are influencing my culture, actually as a leader, you have more control over that piece, because that's what a decapitalization process comes in, because you've had the discussions and you understand the bottlenecks that are keeping your organization moving forward. What is it that people are really thinking when they're telling me yes, right? But what is it they're really thinking? Oh, this is not going to work. What is it that I am a leader? What am I really thinking? Because I'm putting that energy out there. Now, you can address that as an organization. It still has to be addressed, even though you recognize that realistically, I'm not going to be able to change everybody's perspective. But what I am going to do as a leader is I'm going to acknowledge that these are some challenges that are these are the gossip, it's almost like the gossip that's impacting our organization. These are the assumptions that's impacting our culture. And I might not be able to change your perspective individually. I'm going to try to get you on board, but this is where the decapitalization process, because I'm more focused on us as a collective organization becoming more resilient. And so I'm going to put structure and policy in place to make it very clear as a leader. Because listen, this is even relevant if I told you that I needed you to put together a project plan to launch a new initiative, and then somebody has that level of resistance, right? That level of, because we apply unconscious bias to race or whatever. But again, think of it outside of the DEIA context as a general change management. What are the bottlenecks that's inhibiting the change? So any project that you're leading where you're going to have to champion and get people on board, it cannot be done if you don't address the biases or the issue in the room, or you know what I mean? Because whatever you do is not going to, it's just going to be a band-aid. When I build out programs, I do build out things from a consultancy standpoint. And you know that, when you're a consultant, you are just that. You tell the truth, but you have to go with what the client wants.
Yeah.
So, if we don't want to do that, okay. But I'm letting you know that this is going to be, if you want something sustainable, then we have to address the challenge here, right? At least acknowledge it, Leaders need to at least acknowledge the challenges of whether, again, it's a DEI program or any change that they're leading. And then that's how you work to mitigate the impact. You mitigate the impact by acknowledging it and putting structure in place to say, okay, I'm not going to be able to, I might not change you collectively because of your personal human experiences, right? But I'm going to let you know this is the standard and the expectation for how we're going to move forward. That's decapitalization. Okay.
You love that word. You love that. You love that process.
Yeah, because a lot of times within that, though, I found like if I've gone to do, I remember once I went and did resiliency training, just a simple resiliency training, and one of the guys who was like skeptical of me at first, like, this is just another one of those office band-aid processes, let's build it. And by the end, though, because what I did was I just kind of let them, I was like, this training is for you guys, yes, I have my PowerPoints and handy dandy notebooks and all of that, but I said, I was like, within the context of this, we're going to talk about resiliency, but I want you to really take a deep dive into your organizational culture and how you guys work in your team dynamics. And let's actually use this as the first step to not only talk about your personal resiliency, but to help you as a team become more resilient. And that training really, they were really engaged in a facilitated conversation that not only, yes, they walked away with a personal burnout plan, but then they identified some challenges within their team dynamic that's like, okay, this is actually impacting me personally, right? And what is the belief behind that? Why is it that we're doing this that way? So I said, this is a very diverse context. So I hope that I answered your question holistically.
You did. Thank you, Kristi. You talked a little bit about educational institutions and when it comes and some instances of where women are the marginalized population. So when it comes to educational institutions and organizations, how can they better support the advancement of women and BIPOC individuals in leadership roles? And actually, marginalized populations, LGBTQ+, vets, individuals with disabilities.
You got to be intentional about your program and understand what pipeline management looks like and workforce development truly looks like, right? When we talk about workforce development initiatives, we understand that I'm looking at these groups have been consistently marginalized. I really love, it's not going to come to me immediately off the top of my head, but I really love like some of these programs that they've implemented for veterans where, you have programs that look at a veteran's skill set and know these are people who are working in a high pressure situation. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I have bullets flying over my head because I'm an administrator. So there's definitely people who have been out there in the field working, right? People who know these are some of your best leaders and managers. These are some of your best folks that know how to work under and looking at those transferable skills and really seeking to understand how to put them in position to leverage those skill set, because I kind of believe like if you got somebody who has those crossover skills, a lot of companies have created programs that allow veterans to transition out and into like these workforce development programs that actually provide some respect and for their skill set and allows them to leverage them. And then when we talk about companies and pipeline management and recruitment, you really have to look at where you're doing your advertising for recruitment, developing relationships, like, there's Hispanically serving institutions, there's HBCUs, develop relationships with universities and intentional relationships, not just like we're going to just hire, but also like we're going to offer internships, we're going to offer like get the students engaged early on, and then actually have a actual workforce development plan within your company where if your intention is to develop these individuals into leadership, one, and I have a video about this on my website where I talk about, because I was looking at it like from a nonprofit board standpoint, but from a pipeline management standpoint, it's like, okay, we're looking at where we're advertising, and this is where you're seeing the HR part of me, right? Making sure that we're advertising to diverse organizations, diverse outlets, connecting with different universities, institutions, trade associations, being intentional about that,
Yes.
national associations that cater to these groups. But then when we talk about the talent management pipeline, is like really understanding if the goal is to really shape these individuals into the next generation of leaders. Now we want the best of the best, right? And you've gone out and recruited them, but understand that you're going to have to shape and really get them acquainted and adapted to the culture of your organization and shape them into the leader that you want to be. And I think that goes for me as a military. I'm a little bit different because I'm a reservist, right? So I have an everyday job. But for people who are coming out of the military, women, new college graduates, you're going to really have to be intentional about how you shape. When we talk about inclusive leadership, development, programmatic design, being really intentional about starting that pipeline early on from the point that they come into the company, when you see their potential as an emerging leader, making sure they're getting the proper mentorship, the proper access, the proper sponsorship. When I say sponsorship, that means that that person has proven themselves from whether it's through mentoring a project delivered, they have proven their capability, and somebody's willing to tie their reputation and champion and be the champion for that person when they're not in the room. The reason why I've been able to sit at the tables that I've sat at, even in the military, is because people have championed me because they know my work ethic. Right. And I think now, if you give a person a fair shot, when we talk about building equity, when you give a person a fair shot by addressing those systematic barriers because you created and cultivated this pipeline to help that person rise. Now it is up to that person to rise to the occasion.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
That's when we can look and say, okay, now we've given you these opportunities. It wasn't just a surface level opportunity. It was we really invested in mentoring you and setting you up for success. Now, if you don't take advantage of that I think that's a different story than just saying I came into my class and handed everybody a book. Now everybody can read, because that's not what the real world looks like. But then I also think we have to be realistic on the expectations, right? Companies are in the business of making money, so they have to be, if they're going to do something like that, there has to be a genuine commitment to. And I think that this is where we see so much of the pushback, because companies are in the business of making money. We're in a political climate where just even saying DEIA is very triggering. So to the point where even groups that have serviced diverse groups of women are having to, drop the name woman from their title, which I think is really shameful. But if I'm in the business of making money, I no longer really have to really be comply with affirmative action, and I can just say, well, it's all over. It reminds me, as a history professor, it reminds me of after the end of the Civil War, when we were going through the process of rebuilding, and people just said, all right, you're free now, not recognizing that, these people they just came from slavery, right? Some of them, I read Booker T. Washington's book. I think in the beginning of that book, he talked about, okay, I didn't pick up a fork and a spoon until I was 6 years old, until after the end of slavery. I didn't sleep on my first bed. This was years ago I did this, but you got to think about it. Not that we're living in those times, but I'm just saying that if you're going to make this commitment to being that and champion that inclusivity, then it really is going to require an investment, because otherwise it's just going to roll back. So you have to be intentional about developing those leadership pipelines very early on, giving people opportunities, identifying your best of the best, and really helping people to build careers within the organization. Otherwise, look at how fast the rollback of affirmative action hasn't been that long. I mean, we're talking about a less than a 6 month
summer.
Yeah. I mean, and so look at what's happening. It hasn't been that long. So we are not as far as people think.
Oh no, and we're regressing, actually.
Yeah, we are regressing.
So it's like, we're taking steps back. It's like, what the heck? It's and we're seeing the effects, as you had said. I know there was like a couple weeks ago, the news was showing the statistics of the admissions at universities and all, how between last year and this year, how much it's changed. and due to affirmative action being dismantled. And
I was watching a news clip, or discussion from Roland Martin, and we were talking. He had a HBCU president on who was talking about this. It's like HBCUs have seen this increase in enrollment, right?
Yeah.
And I said it must be very difficult, as an HBCU leader, because and I'm speaking from a space that I have not worked in, only aspired to, but I have, again, as a former college administrator, just speaking from that standpoint, because we know from a there, even though we say we're nonprofit, we really have to rely on the butts in seats, the student enrollment, to bring in tuition, right? So it might be nonprofit, but if the enrollment is low, we're not going to be able to pay. I mean, I've been part of that. On the other side, we have to make the decision to cut the classes, and we're cutting down. We cut the classes because of low student enrollment. Then it's going to impact teachers, the professors' salaries. We're barely making anything, especially at the community college level. So I said all that to say is, like, we see this increase in enrollment, and this is based on, that news report from Roland Martin, where he talks about this increase in enrollment. But the catch-22 of that is, it's like, bam, you see this increase in enrollment, but that's because our students are literally feeling like they have nowhere else to go, which is very interesting, because why were HBCU started in the first place? Because historically, and people were like, oh, well, there's no need for them now. They literally were started because we could not go to PWI school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now we're back. Like, if you're talking about regression, like, how fast is that? So it's like, I want to brag about this enrollment, but at the same time, it's like,
what's the cause of the boost in the enrollment, the significant boost in enrollment?
Yeah,
and then
like
it also makes them burst at the seams, because their infrastructure may not be able to.
That's exactly what's happening.
To serve everybody as well as it.
So it's like, we want the boom, right?
But it's going to take time for it to build, and then once they do build, is affirmative action going to be coming back? Who knows? It's like,
but also you don't want this in 20. That's why it's a very hard. I would say it would be very hard for me to speak on that from the standpoint of not being a non-administrative agency, because it's a catch-22. It's just like, you want the boom, but at the same time, it's like this other feeling of our kids are having to come back because we regressed this much in a matter of months. I mean, you know what I mean? Just in a matter of months, where young people feeling like they don't have a safe space. So it's very interesting. Right?
It is very, very interesting. So last question. How does fostering inclusive communities for people with disabilities contribute to overall organizational success?
So
the A in the DEIA.
That's right. We in June, so we kicked off our Diversity WORxK Roundtable series in June. It just happened to be Pride Month, and so I didn't do it because it was Pride Month, but I made sure I acknowledged it, right, because those were historic. Because the following month was Disability Pride Month, which, let me just explain that. Disability Pride Month, the word pride, they take that from the context of the Black Pride movement. So when you hear LGBTQ Pride Month, that's June, and then July, because I had never heard of Disability Pride Month, right? But it's actually just another way of celebrating disability awareness.
Nice.
When we launched this in June, I had a panel of, allies, but that was more so like a general inclusive environment type of DEIA panel. But when we came back and did this in July, I literally had everybody. I intentionally had a Disability Pride Month DEIA panel. Everybody on that panel was a disability advocate. And because we can't forget people with disabilities, because look, 1 in 4 people suffer from a mental illness. So a lot of it, we don't even know the person next to us could have a disability, just because we think that disability is some physical impairment. We don't know what people are always suffering or dealing with. And I don't feel like people should have to tell you their whole medical history at a job, right? So if you say 1 in 4 people are suffering from some form of mental illness, that can even be fall under depression. So the person next to you, just because you don't see it and you don't see that physical ailment, you don't know what people are experiencing health-wise. And so it's really important to include that within the context of the conversation, because we get so focused on, I'm gonna just call it. Oh Lord, I'm gonna sound like a hater, but when I hate to, we're just gonna call it our inclusive programming, or we're not gonna you know what I mean? Like people dropping all of
Yeah.
the letters because they're so scared to
Mhm.
have the conversation. But
Yeah.
what if it really doesn't matter? Then why are you changing it? Right?
Yeah.
You know, why are you changing the name? Because it's a lot in the name. I'm not going to change my name just because people don't like it. I hate my middle name. God knows I do.
Me too. I hate my middle name too. I feel like I should
Was
be
there
milking
like
a
a thing
cow.
in the 80s, you know, late 70s, 80s, where everybody was naming people the same?
I know. It's like we're from the same generation. It's like, what, parents, what were you thinking?
Where did y'all get this from? But I'm not going to change it. I mean, I probably
No.
but at this age, I'm not gonna change it. My grandmother, I remember her saying off topic. I remember her saying, "I hated your middle name." She was a nurse at the hospital I was born. She's like, "I hated your middle name so bad. I literally went and asked, can I pay to have it changed?" She said that. So okay, we take that in the same way that we do the DEI thing. It you know, no, we're not gonna change that because the work is still the same, right? So if the work is so people forget the A. They are, you know, because we focus so much on disability being something that we see in the physical that we forget that people are when we talk about EAP programs and needing that support, we forget. And then sometimes people who do have a physical disability, we need to have accommodations for them, right? And those accommodations that they need to be able to see them, and or you know there needs to be things present to support them. So leaving them out of the conversation, it is literally forgetting a whole group of people who have stood right along with us in these discussions and debates on DEI. So I intentionally put the A there because I know that if I say DEI, when we're going to talk about race and gender and in sexuality, and those conversations are already there. But people who have, again, a disability, we need to make sure that they're included in that conversation too.
Definitely.
So that A is really the disability is the A is there for accessibility, meaning that they need the same access. They need to be included in these discussions and part of the conversations because a lot of times people are just making assumptions, right? We're making an assumption. Oh, there's nothing wrong.
The wrong assumptions.
You know what I mean? And there's no, you're perfectly fine. And you don't know what a person is doing. And then on the other hand, yes, in some context, you might have to share an aspect, you know, privately with a supervisor for certain accommodations. But I shouldn't have to sit in a room and tell you everything about myself if I don't want to.
Yeah.
I just agree. Get you to understand me.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
You don't have to defend why you are using a certain accommodation or a certain.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I don't feel like that. I should have to do that. That's really nobody's business.
It isn't.
You know, if I clear this with my supervisor and you see me doing it, then that's all that needs to be done. I don't need to show you my paperwork. You know. So when we talk about inclusive communities, I intentionally make sure that A is there because I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the height of all of the other things that take the forefront that we forget that.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, because there's also other letters that could be added, like the J and the B and all. I usually just keep DEI because to me, I just keep it all encompassing, you know. But because that's usually what more people are familiar with it.
Yeah, and I see people using like DEIB. But I kind of feel like when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, the B to me this is belonging.
Inclusion.
I mean, it's all the same.
Is inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And J's for the justice involved. Yeah, so this has been a wonderful conversation, Kristi. I could go on and on and on and on about. Like, I love hearing you talk, and I love asking questions. It's just been really nice and learning about your framework. And I'm excited for your book. I'm gonna check it out on Amazon. Listeners, let's go into some key takeaways really quickly. So we're going to go into some key takeaways very quickly, Kristi. Then we'll do some next steps, and then I'll ask you after that how people can get hold of you. Okay. All right, listeners, some key takeaways. So Kristi and I talked about building inclusive learning environments. We discussed the importance of creating spaces where diverse learners, including those with disabilities and BIPOC communities, feel valued and supported. We talked about understanding and mitigating unconscious bias and gained some insights into how unconscious bias impacts decision-making and strategies to overcome it, particularly in educational and organizational settings. We talked about supporting women's advancement and explored the challenges and opportunities in championing gender equity and how organizations can better support women in leadership. We talked about DEIA and belonging, and learned about the critical role of belonging in fostering inclusive workplaces and communities, and how leaders can champion these values, not just belong, but more so accessibility. We talked about empowering individuals through the REBT framework. Kristi shared her signature framework, highlighting how cognitive behavioral approaches can drive meaningful change in both personal development and organizational culture. Kristi, are there any other key takeaways that I may have missed that you want to say?
No, I thought that was perfect. And one point I will just add here is just when we talk about DEI, people hate the term trickle-down effect. But the truth is, if I could just say that, it's really important that we remember that this stuff has implications, right? There's a trickle-down effect. So there's always that surface level discussion that has everybody worked up emotionally, which is what I don't tend to respond to, because I'm going to be back and just kind of observing, like, okay, when this happens, what is it? And sometimes you don't even know what's going to really happen until it rolls out. We don't see the impact of it, like what we're seeing now, right?
That's true. That's true. And I'll add on to that also the assessment, making sure to assess regularly. You did mention that a few times. Yeah. So possible next steps for you listeners. Remember, I always like to leave with a call to action so you can continue to improve yourselves and your organizations. So assess your organizational culture. Encourage listeners to evaluate how their organizations address diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and where improvements can be made. Implement the REBT DEIA framework. Suggest that organizations and individuals consider adopting Dr. Taylor's framework to enhance their DEIA initiatives. Engage in continuous learning. Life is learning, people. I always say that. Life is learning. Promote the importance of ongoing education on DEIA topics, including unconscious bias training, and encourage listeners to seek out additional resources and coaching. And champion inclusivity in your community. Inspire listeners to take actionable steps, inspire others to take actionable steps in their workplaces and communities to foster a culture of inclusion and belonging. Any other next steps you can think of, Kristi?
I think your next step should be to buy this book. It's really a short book. It's really, I have a few updates that I'm making to the book. So by the time this airs, it'll be a little different, but just a few, updates. But the framework and stuff will not change. I think this is about 100 pages. And honestly, we just laid it out in a way. It's probably, honestly, a good 45-minute read. Okay? Yes. It's to the point, gets you thinking. And remember that you can use it. It's a multilateral framework, meaning that it's not only just in terms of the DEI piece, because the book itself doesn't talk about, there's no statistics on race and stuff in here. So, or gender, it's actually a change management model for how you can structure and design your DEIA programs as well as lead organizational change.
Awesome. And listeners, I will, and Kristi, I will have a link to your book on the resource slide and as well as in the summary. So yes, definitely get her book. It's going to change your organization in a positive way. So
yes, you got to have tough, difficult conversations, right? So, and we got to understand that we're not going to be able to make change until we actually address the underlying issues to the extent that we can. That includes self-assessment as well.
I agree. And I'm going to get your book. So, because I don't have it on my bookshelf. So I'm going to go get it and read it. So thank you. So Kristi, if our listeners want to get a hold of you, what are the best ways that they can reach you if they want to maybe use your, get in touch with you for your work at WorkSolutions to utilize your framework, or maybe they want you to be a speaker, give a workshop, or maybe a speaker on their podcast, or they just want to connect with you as a professional? How are the ways they can get hold of you?
So very quickly, you can just go to the website, WorkSolutions.com. We literally have everything there, including the framework. If you go to WorkSolutions.com/framework, and that shows you our framework. WorkSolutions.com/coaching shows you our coaching model, which I didn't even mention here because it's such a great conversation. But we really have frameworks and structures that cross over into each other that's research-based, right? Another way, across all social medias, I am under WorkSolutions. So that's very simple. And then you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. A quick Google search will give you Dr. Kristy Taylor. I generally will pop up as a social impact career coach. And
Nice.
you can connect with me there on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, listeners, I will have Kristy's contact information on one of the last slides of our podcast, as well as in the summary of our podcast. So you can have ease of access to reach her and get on her website and contact her, get connected with her. She has some great initiatives and programs that will help both you and your organizations improve their inclusivity and accessibility for everyone. So, Kristi, it's been a pleasure having you on my podcast. As I said, I could talk on this forever and listen to you forever. So you're doing some great work. So thank you so much for being a guest on
Thank you so much. And thank you for having these conversations and having me as a guest as well.
You are very welcome. Listeners, remember our podcast episodes launch every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So check out our next episode next Thursday. And remember, just continue learning, continue growing, continue being inclusive, and remember, stay diversifused. I'll see you next time. Bye. And to be a guest speaker on the Get Diversifused podcast, I'm on the lookout for guests, so if you're passionate about DEI and would like to share your unique insights, experiences, or success stories, I want to hear from you. If you're a fellow podcaster who's passionate about DEI, let's swap the mic and amplify each other's voices. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out to me at Andrea@diversifuse.com and I'll send you the link to our guest interest form. Hope to hear from you soon. Remember, stay diversifused. Now go out there and make a difference. And as always, for more strategies on building inclusive workplaces and communities, check out Diversifuse. We're here to guide you on your DEI journey. Make sure to visit our website at diversifuse.com and follow us on social media for the latest happenings, blog posts, tips, and events.